There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. America, my wayward child, can't you hear the thundering hoofbeats of a pale horse running wild?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have a special pre-election program this evening, and we are going to be introducing a new movie and a group of people that have been working. I've known these folks for several years. They've been extremely helpful to us in the anti-Agenda 21 movement around the country, and they were very helpful to me in providing us with information and some DVDs to present to our state legislators and our also to our executive offices at the state level. We had an anti-Agenda 21 bill, and quite frankly, we went down in flames. And the reason was because people don't want to believe that this stuff is really going on. Well, in the ensuing 2 years since we had that bill before the Montana legislature, a lot has happened, and a lot of the people that said we were a bunch of right-wing zealots and right-wing nuts have since changed their tune, because it's all in front of us now, and this is going to be absolutely the most critical watershed election in the history of our country, because we are talking about whether we will retain our Constitution and remain a constitutional republic, or we will become part of a global superstate that operates under a Marxist Socialist system. And my guests tonight, Chuck and Anita Untersee, have been movie producers. On our website, you'll get an idea of some of their background. But Chuck is ex-military. He was an officer. He did film production while he was in the U.S. Army. He then went into the civilian film sector and has done an enormous amount of work in Hollywood, from virtually every aspect, from advertising to television to movies, and has a really an incredible background in film production. And the new movie that will be coming out this year is, it's coming out right now, and we'll talk about how our audience can help to get this movie into local theaters all over our country. And since we are now being broadcast in 88 countries around the world, we hope that we can induce folks from all over the world to be involved in getting this movie to theaters near you. So with that said, I am going to very quickly, most of our listeners are much more in tune on things that are going on in the world than just your average radio or TV audience. But I know that our listeners mostly understand Agenda 21. But I will give a very brief overview, and then I will hand the floor over to our guests to talk about their new movie. We also have on this call a gentleman who is very, very intimately involved in this movie. He plays General George Washington, and that is Mr. Mark Collins. And he will be also talking about his role in this movie. So with that, I will talk about Agenda 21 very briefly. Agenda 21 is the name of the UN-published white paper that was produced after the Real Earth Summit that was held in June of 1992. It outlines a socialist plan for a sustainable, and that's the key word, sustainable. We hear that every day. A sustainable world in the 21st century. The Rio Earth Summit was billed as a world conference on the catastrophic global warming, global environmental issues facing mankind, and the blueprint for a sustainable 21st century. In reality, the Rio Earth Summit was a blueprint for the future of mankind, where our Constitution, national sovereignty, and unalienable rights are eliminated and replaced by a world government controlled by a powerful cartel of international financial elites. President George Herbert Walker Bush signed the Rio Accords at the 1992 Earth Summit on behalf of the United States. This is not a Democrat-Republican thing. It is a progressive socialist thing, and we have had both parties involved in this movement for some time. Within months, cabinet-level agencies and the UN-sponsored NGOs started to embed policies of sustainable development into bureaucratic regulations and lobbying efforts. Shortly after his inauguration in 1993, President Bill Clinton created the President's Council on Sustainable Development by executive order. This is a Clinton initiative, and it was really pushed by him. By making sustainable development a permanent feature of all federal policy within the administrative branch, he effectively bypassed Congress and threw the Agenda 21 implementation process into high gear, forever changing the mission of federal agencies from serving the people to serving the environment. That treaty failed passage by the U.S. Senate in 1994. As is required under our Constitution, any treaty has to be ratified by two-thirds of the Senate. Well, it failed that on a vote of 98-2 because of the last-minute heroics on the Senate floor by Dr. Michael Kaufman and Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. So really, what is Agenda 21? Let's find out what it really means, because it means a lot that people have no idea what really is behind so-called sustainable development. So let's see what it says. This is targeted for elimination by 2030, and these are listed as the goals of sustainable development. Number one, all private property ownership and rights have to be eliminated. We have to submit to the collective. Well, this is communism, plain and simple, but that's what Agenda 21 is. Number two, all forms of crop irrigation, pesticides, and commercial fertilizers, except when approved for big agribusiness like Monsanto, ADM, and so forth, will be eliminated. Livestock production and most meat consumption will be eliminated. We'll be living in a vegetarian world. Privately owned vehicles and personal travel will be eliminated. The burning of fossil fuels for energy production or personal vehicular travel will be eliminated. Single-family homes and suburban communities will be eliminated. We'll be looking at stack and pack, very dense urban housing, and it will be very controlled. Most forms of mineral extraction and mining and public lands timber harvesting will be eliminated. Dams, reservoirs, golf courses, ski lodges, and vacation resorts will be eliminated. And finally, the number one and the most concerning thing that people should be aware of is under UN Agenda 21, the permanent human population needs to be reduced to under 1 billion people. Now, that's a lot of people to get rid of. They have come out recently within the last 2 years and said that if they get all these other things completely in place, that the world could potentially house and nurture 2.5 billion people. That's still a third of what we have now on our planet. So that is exactly what these people have in mind for the future of America. And that is why this movie is so incredibly important to the American people. And Chuck and Anita, I want to tell you, you have my utmost respect for putting so much of your lives and so much of literally everything you own into the production of this movie so that the American people can understand exactly how bad things are and why we need to turn this ship around. So with that, Chuck, I'll kind of turn it over to you. I'd like to have you introduce yourself and Anita and maybe talk a little bit about your background in movie and film production, and then we will lead that. I'd like to have you introduce Mark when you're through with your introduction.
Well, Dan, first let me say it's such a blessing to be able to still speak freely in the Republic. Hopefully after the election that'll still be a reality. But I can say that it was all Anita's doing. She did all the work. No, we began this project 6 years ago, almost 6 years ago. And having been in the business for a long time, we knew, or we thought, it would take an average window of maybe a year and a half to do the film, but it unfolded in a sort of unusual manner in terms of fundraising and getting more and more access to people that are in the film, and so it just kept going. And then about halfway into it, we actually made a DVD of a first version of it, and almost simultaneously got a call from a Hollywood distributor that we could release it theatrically, which is unheard of for a documentary, and it was the same distributor that did 2016 Obama's America. So we were thrilled, and we even as recently as a year and a half ago, were very frustrated because we were still shooting, still editing, and we couldn't quite get it out. And yet in April of this year, we released it in Houston for 1 weekend for a test, and it was 7th in the nation for box office for an opening weekend. And so we were thrilled and thought this is going to take it down the road. It'll be released nationally, and unfortunately, in order to do that, you have to raise millions of dollars for advertising money. So we got very close to that, and because of the election, wanted to move it forward quicker than we were being able to, and decided to compromise and release it on DVD, which we have done now. It's on Amazon through our website. And also, there's a second distributor that does not private screenings, but one-night screenings. And so the good thing about that, any activist, any guy who's really driven by the passion for patriot issues that wants this in their town, no matter if it's a small town with a local theater or a city with any of the major chains, can get the film in their town by getting organizations to go with it to back them, such as churches, veterans organizations, Tea Party, whatever. So anyway, it's now out, and it's, they say everything happens in God's time, and it's a much better time than had we done it a couple of years ago. And Anita can tell you of some of the travails in working through it over 6 years, but we are really thankful that A, it got out, and B, we're almost finished with it.
All right. Anita, would you like to add a little something to that?
Well, I'd like to tell you the name of the movie. It's called Revelation, Dawn of Global Government. And obviously the title, Revelation, refers to the idea that it is a revelation, it is a story, and it's it refers to the biblical last book in the Bible, written by the Apostle Paul, and he wrote it was the revelation of Jesus Christ, actually, and it talks about the fourth horsemen of the apocalypse. So that is kind of the outline in a way, because it talks about coming problems that we're going to have in this world. So,
well, you know, the whole issue of the global government. It has, the film has biblical perspective in that the title Revelation could be a sort of double entendre. Either it's revelation relevant to the book of Revelation, and or it is a revelation to the average Joe out there who still doesn't seem to get it. And so we had hoped that this could be sort of a freedom grenade in the minds of friends and family who still glaze over, and it's a great tool as a DVD because it's sort of like if you tell someone about something, they may or may not believe you if you're close to them. If someone else tells them the same thing, it might work. So you can sort of come around the side and give someone a DVD, and it's not like you trying to push something on. So we look at it as a cause, not a film.
Well, and I think that's a good way to describe it. And I have to tell you, some of the actors that you have in this film, I'm friends with some of these folks, and I'm really tickled because Charlie Daniels is kind of the main. And again, it's not fair to call him an actor; it's a character in a very good documentary film, but that is very well produced and not a bit stuffy, and describes exactly where we're heading and why we're heading there. And Charlie Daniels happens to be good friends of a gentleman that we just went on Southern Broadcasting Network several weeks ago. And Mickey Wogan is an associate of Mickey Womack is an associate of Charlie Daniels, and this is going to be a program that's going to be carried on the Southern Broadcasting Network and is going to be heard all over the world. And I think Mickey is really thrilled that you folks are on with a film that Charlie Daniels has such a big part of. And all I can say is I've been a huge fan and promoter of this film for a long time, and I'm tickled that you're finally there, and we need to get as many people on board as we can.
Anita just pinched me because she said Paul the Revelator instead of John the Revelator.
Yeah, and if millions of people are going to be listening, and I got the wrong author of the Book of Revelation, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's okay. I caught it too.
Charlie Daniels. We when we wanted to get a celebrity to sort of, American people are sort of trained like Pavlov's dogs that if a celebrity in whatever venue, music, the film, whatever, says something, that it's important for you to listen. And so we wanted a celebrity, and yet, I'm sure you can imagine so many celebrities are all looking over their shoulder as far as their career and wouldn't step up. So many people in our society generally are like that. But Charlie, we followed him for some time and watched his soapbox and so on, and knew that he was on the same page in terms of being a patriot and his faith and everything else. So we thought this is the perfect Americana thread to weave through the story, to carry the story. And virtually equally is Alex Jones, who is a great counter to everything that Charlie says, or to carry it further. And then there's Lieutenant General William Boykin, who was one of the founders of Delta Force, commander of all special forces, major guy. And I would say all the major people in the film, there's something like 40 people in the film, they're virtually all come at this whole concept from a Christian point of view. And it took as long as it did because we drove something like 25,000 miles around the country, and from West Coast to East Coast, Maine to Texas, and and of course in your state in Montana when we filmed Randy Weaver. But the three, the triumvirate, if you want to call it that, of Charlie, General Boykin, and Alex Jones, really weave the story between all these other speakers who each is an expert in their own area. J. Edward Griffin for the Federal Reserve, as you know, Michael Shaw for Agenda 21, General Boykin, major expert on Marxism, and we have Kamal Salim, who was a Muslim Brotherhood sleeper cell sent here for that purpose, and became Christian. And we interviewed him. He wrote a book with General Boykin. We interviewed him, and he explains that the issue of the open border agenda in terms of Islamic terrorists is not a fantasy. He said they're here, they're everywhere, and waiting. And he says that he was in the Muslim Brotherhood for over 20 years, recruited when he was 6 years old. So, and then further, we really wanted to make sure that people got it in terms of weaving the story. So we brought George Washington into it, and it was a funny thing how we were to go back east to film a reenactment of Washington crossing the Delaware, and we were to leave within a week, and we had not found anyone to cast for George Washington. And I'm sort of a perfectionist, and I kept saying to Anita, we have to find somebody who's really right, who looks right, doesn't look hokey and made up. And so she brought home a DVD one night and says, look at this. And it was the History Channel series, The Revolution. And starring in it was Mark Collins, George Washington, who is our George Washington now. And he just did an amazing job. And we found the story that when they were doing that film, they also wanted to cast the perfect George Washington. They had a copy of a plaster life mask for a painter would have used in the 18th century. And they did a split face between Mark and the plaster cast, and you can virtually not tell the difference. And it wasn't by accident, because Mark he is a Baptist pastor, but it also has a ministry where he goes around the country explaining to people about the faith of the Founding Fathers and so on. And I don't want to steal his thunder, but Mark, why don't you explain some of the things you've done?
Mark, go ahead. That sounds like a great lead-in.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Chuck, thank you so much. I am truly humbled. Yeah, it was interesting. Chuck described to me how that he then pursued Partisan Pictures, who made the Revolution series, to try to find this George Washington. And Chuck and Anita live in the San Antonio area. And so when they finally tracked down, Partisan Pictures says, is this guy available? Where can we find him? They said, well, he lives in San Antonio. And so we were shocked to find out that we were actually neighbors. And it has truly been a joy and an honor to be part of this project. As we did the Behold Pale Horse, and we continued moving forward with it, we said we've done a great job of describing the problems in our nation and Agenda 21 and in our world, but what is the solution? And we came up with the same solution that our founding fathers did, and that is faith in God and Jesus Christ, his son. And it's so amazing to look at what has made this nation great. And it's been my mantra and my desire to travel this nation and remind the forgetful people of the legacy of faith and freedom that we've been left with and that we need to pass on to the next generation. And that's one of the greatest hopes that I think this film can convey, is to be aware of, as Washington said it, the science of government. It's interesting, we do not teach our children government as a science, something that you can measure and weigh and observe cause and effect. But it's very attainable, and yet our children are void of that knowledge at all. It's so sad as I go to schools around the nation, from elementary to high school to universities, I'll ask the students, young man, young woman, what form of government do you have? And almost without fail, they will say democracy. And of course, then I explained that the Founding Fathers said democracy is mob rule, and that democracies live short lives and die violent deaths. And they're stunned, and they don't know what a republic is. But at the end of that hour-long session, they have a very good grasp of what a republic is. And so that's the exciting part of what I do. But I think that's what this film can do, is remind this nation of where we have come from and what it's going to take to retain those freedoms that so many have fought for.
You know, that's interesting because we have two women in the film, one from Romania and one from Austria, who both came to this country to, escape the police state mentality which they'd grown up in. The lady from Romania, Elena Kita, was escaped with her husband right before the fall of Ceausescu, and but they can so readily see the change, and the change is coming much more than the average American, because the average American has a certain sense of entitlement. They think that meat grows in the grocery store, and money is manufactured in the ATM, et cetera, and if any of that gets turned off, they will stamp their feet. But they don't realize how easily that light switch can go. And yet these women, Kitty Wertman, had grown up in Austria in the early 30s through the war, and breaks down how quickly the dramatic changes came to Nazi Germany, and how they so mirror what's going on here, as well as what Elena Kita said in Romania. But it really all comes down to totalitarianism, and it doesn't matter what ism you call it, and that's what is unfolding and being evolved today in terms of global government. And so many Americans think that, it could never happen here. Well, it is happening here. In fact, depending on what happens, with the election, it frustrates me when people say this is one of the most important elections in America. It's not one of the most. It is the most. There has never been anything more critical, because if Trump does not prevail, then you're going to have a quick evolution into the global state with this country, because if we as a republic stood as the founders envisioned, then that there cannot possibly be global government, because there's no it just is not compatible. But that's why there has been this agenda for open borders, for Common Core, which is in our film. The dumbing down of America, all the various false flags and so on that have to do with the economy, and looming war with Russia and so on. It's all an agenda, and it's to create global government, and we're on the precipice of that. And of course, the real calling card for it is Agenda 21.
No, that's exactly right. And one of the things that comes out of your movie, and I have to tell people that although it is a very Christian concept and a very Christian movie, it is also a very, very good historical and documentary film that provides an awful lot of information on what has happened that has created the kind of an environment in our country where an idea such as global government could even possibly have a chance of being implemented on the American people. And I think you guys do a really great job of providing a lot of that background and talking about it in a way Charlie Daniels certainly does in his terrific manner and demeanor, of saying it just about as straight and true and to the point as you can get. And I'm really, really pleased that this is coming out at the time that it is. And the one thing I will say, even if Donald Trump prevails at this election, and I think he should by every indication that I can see, except that we know that the system is rigged. In spite of the fact that we've, for so many years, tried so hard to keep our republic free and clean, we also know now that there are an awful lot of people, and it's been happening for literally 100 years. They've been trying to fertilize the ground or open the doors to global government, and I think we're at a point that even if Trump wins, we're going to have a heck of a fight in front of us to try to bring this republic back the way our founders envisioned.
I believe that some people have asked, well, you know, is it irrelevant after the election? And I think it's ever relevant until these issues are resolved. And if Trump prevails, which we always all pray for, it's going to take a long, long time to unwind all this. And I believe he's the person that can start that ball rolling. But if Hillary prevails, then we're there. I mean,
I think you're right.
And it's funny because David Knight, who's one of the primary hosts on the Alex Jones show, said it was like drinking from a fire hose in terms of information. And you know, we had 43 hours of footage. We had to edit down to an hour and 45 minutes, and it took almost 8 months to edit because it was just mind-boggling to try and find the sweet spots of the story. And the reason for that was so many people we filmed are, you know, very important in their realm, and they're busy, and you know, we would come to them and they would say, "You got an hour." So you don't script something. For instance, when we first met General Boykin, you don't script something for General Boykin and tell him what to say about Marxism. I mean, you just don't do that. So you let them go with it, and then you edit and make the story happen. So it was quite involved. And but I edited it sort of like a giant commercial, meaning it was very fast paced. We didn't have any particular person sit there and tell their whole story from beginning to end and then go to the next person, because I thought it would be boring when you've got so many people. So we moved as if they were in the same room, even talking back and forth to each other, and moved it through the storyline quickly like that. And but that's why it's so helpful to have Washington, to have Alex, to have General Boykin, to have Charlie all sort of push it down the line in terms of pacing.
Yeah, I think that's kind of like their catalyst to make the storyline flow, to have a sense of continuity, but at the same time, the whole thing moves along very quickly. And I agree with you. One of the things that I've noticed about the film, Chuck, is the fact that it's amazing how much material and how much information you've packed into an hour and 45-minute production.
Anita kept saying throughout, leave this out, leave that out, leave this out, leave that out. And then after I made the list to try and make sense of the story, she was, well, you can't leave this out, you can't leave that out. I mean, it was what's in the story in terms of story is Marxism, the role of the church in America, the fact that during the American Revolution, I want Mark to tell you about that, but the Black Robe Regiment, then Agenda 21, and the UN generally, Second Amendment, the open borders, and the North American Union, which is being evolved very quickly to blend with the European Union, the Islamic threat, the Federal Reserve, the economic collapse, the evolution of the police state through privacy and data collection, Common Core, states' rights, and then, of course, a breakdown of the Constitution and why that's so critical and not compatible with world government. But Mark, tell them about the Black Robe Regiment.
Yeah, you know, it's a fascinating part of our history that's almost lost, and that is that as General Howe was kind of raking his generals over the coals, why they couldn't conquer a bunch of pitchfork-wielding farmers after almost 3 years of the Revolutionary War. And they were making all kinds of excuses. And finally, one of his generals said to him, besides all of that, Washington has his Black Robe Regiment. And what they were referring to is the pastors of the Revolutionary period, and how that the pulpits were aflame with, sermons against tyranny and for freedom. And that's what those generals were talking about, is that it was actually the church and those bold pastors that were standing up against tyranny. And that's what's lost in America. The pulpits of America have fallen silent to those things. Even the Battle of Lexington, the shot heard around the world. There was Jonas Clark, the leader of the militia, and those 24 some odd men that were standing there in that Lexington Green. What a lot of people don't know is that fork in the road was actually the backyard of the church there in Lexington. You would thought that the parson would be very upset that the American Revolution would start in the backyard of his church, except the only problem was Jonas Clark was the pastor of that church, and he was the head of that militia. And it was all of his men. In fact, second in command was his chairman of deacons. And those that gave their lives that morning were all members of his church. But the thing that's significant, and there again, history repeats itself. I heard it said the other day, what was the purpose of those redcoats coming down that road heading toward Concord? Well, they were there to collect the ammunition powder stores that were at Concord. And so the shot heard around the world, the issue that ignited that was gun control. And so here we are again, over 200 years later, and we're seeing the same things, and yet we don't know our history. Our citizens don't know that history. And so we're apt to repeat the same mistakes.
And the funny thing is that the one thing that has not repeated itself is that today, and that's the point of our illustration of the Black Robe Regiment reenactments in the film, is that today the church is silent.
Mm-hmm. They are. And I need to point out that the Black Robe Regiments, because of their proactive stance, the British troops would actually go into the churches during the sermons to try to find the they called them traitors, but the patriots that were at that church, and to try to disarm them.
Yes, it was an interesting time in our history, and it's unfortunate that the church is not standing up, and I think it's one of the reasons we find ourselves where we are at. Now, Os Guinness brought out a wonderful example of what he called the Golden Triangle. And for there to be freedom, a people has to have virtue. And for virtue to exist, you have to have faith. And so without those components, freedom is not even possible. That's why John Adams said the government we have formed is for a religious and moral people and will not work for any other. And I think, unfortunately, we have lost sight of that. And we're surprised that our government is beginning not to work.
Well, and I think part of the fact that not only is our government not working, but it's become anti-Christian, and it promotes Islam and other religions, but it's anti-Christian in its very nature, and that should tell us that Christianity is very, very important to our system of government.
Absolutely.
Anita has besides doing a voluminous amount of work in terms of, a barn full of paperwork over the time of this, she has a very particular perspective, female perspective of the sort of nurturing motherhood relevant to our grandchildren. And, so many people say, well, why would you keep working on something for that long? And it really has, like I said earlier, it's become a cause, not just a film. But Anita, why don't you speak to that, because you have always let that be your driving force.
Well, I just wanted to say, in terms of the government, like we were talking about, we can't forget that the government is the people, and we have to be responsible for our government, or we will be told what to do by Washington. So we have to remind them that they are our servants. So, my motivation really is the future generations of my children and my grandchildren. I know what I had growing up, and the opportunities and all the things that we had as kids, and I don't see that as a possibility, particularly in light of what Dan was talking about earlier with all the goals of Agenda 21 that seem too fantastic to believe, but I want them to be able to, follow their dreams and have a business and have a home and raise a family and get to go out and enjoy the great outdoors and have a garden and do all that. And I see all that being tightened up, where they go to school and they've got to deal with Common Core and testing and data collection on every student, and so that's what makes me tick. I want to try to do something to stave off what I see coming.
Well, this is certainly a good film to do that, and one of the things that you point out in your film is how we are shifting, and this is very important, we are shifting from individualism to collectivism as taught in our schools. And that is something that is antithetical to freedom. Collectivism is taking away the rights of the individual, supposedly for the good of the larger group. But when you take rights away from individuals, you are taking away their freedom, and that means a loss of freedom for the entire group. Because after all, what is a group? It's just a whole bunch of individuals. And if we don't have rights as individuals, we also won't have rights as a collective.
The whole concept of Agenda 21 or global government is so diametrically opposed to the American system as intended, at least. And it was based on liberty and ingenuity and free market, and it's just everything that's the opposite of that. And for what reason? It's for a few so-called global elite to rule over us and of course get rid of 90% of us under Agenda 21. In fact, the perfect analogy for people that need a quick study about what is Agenda 21, most everyone by now has seen one or more of the Hunger Games series of movies. And that's basically based on the Agenda 21 concept, where you have vast areas of wilderness that are untouched at the point of the story in Hunger Games, and the worker bees, pushed into the background in small areas and so on until they finally rise up. And then there's this elite who is controlling all that. That's Agenda 21. And of course, from a biblical perspective, it is purely reflective of Daniel and Revelation in terms of one world government, one world currency, one world church, the potential for the mark of the beast. All these things are unfolding at light speed. And so for people that are not Christian, it can be a revelation, and we've seen that happen. We've had about 8 or 9 theatrical screenings, and for people that are, it's fairly self-evident. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who don't want to know, and they just are comfortable, and it's going to come as a thief in the night. But we're always astounded when we travel around, either with the film or when we were producing it, that there are so many good people out there who are just regular. I grew up in a little town in Texas, Norman Rockwell environment with football and mom and apple pie. And there's still so many people out there like that, but still who do not get it. And the reason they don't get it is because they get most of the news from the national news media, which is fully an agenda-driven environment, and they just can't believe that anything like this could happen. But those are our target audience, those people that know the patriot community to be Paul Revere's, to get this out as a tool to all those people that don't know but are just solid people who somehow, don't have eyes to see or ears to hear.
Well, one of the things that the comments that you get from the mainstream media, and you also get from the people that are promoting this crazy agenda of theirs, is that we are anti-government, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We are anti-totalitarian, global, Marxist, Socialist government, but we are very pro-constitutional Republican government as envisioned by our founders. We recognize that there have to be some limitations on that. But the reality is we are very pro-good government, and they are very pro-bad government. Now, how can we be the bad guys in a battle like that?
Well, it's in this politically correct world we live in, which was, of course, a Karl Marx invention. It always kills me when people say, I'm offended by this or offended by that, and I'm eager to say, well, so what? Be offended. That's a right in the free state to be to have an opinion, and you're lucky to be able to have one. But it's just amazing that how quickly people have learned to be submissive in this country, and it won't take long. And in terms of the Common Core propaganda, the state-controlled church, and the suppression of Christianity and so on, to find us all in a strangers in a strange land. Who would ever have thought?
I think a lot of us feel that way right now, Chuck. I think it certainly isn't the same country that we grew up in.
Yeah, and I think that, back to politically correct, when people say Trump is a nationalist, some people are horrified. They suck in their breath. Well, guess what? What's wrong with being a nationalist? If our borders are open, we don't have a country. And if we have trade agreements like NAFTA and TPP that will literally end the sovereignty or the North American Union, the blending of Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., all this is an agenda to dissolve this country. And it's driven by the secret societies, you want to call it, which we address in the film, of the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, among others. And the whole purpose of that is to destroy this country. And so I think it's absolutely critical that, A, we be nationalists, and secondly, that we be offended. It's time that patriots became super offended and stood up and said, I ain't doing this, because otherwise it's going to be Custer's last stand.
No, I think you're right. And one of the things that we, the conservative movement has been guilty of for a very long time, and that is being so afraid that we're going to offend somebody, or that we're going to have make a statement that somebody will find offensive. Well, guess what? Liberty is a very offensive concept when you're attacking it as a communist. And the reality is it's about time we stand up for what we believe in this country. I've got a Habitat 3 just ended in Quito, Ecuador, and that was a UN conference that was attended by 50,000 people, including more than 200 U.S. mayors and another 140 city council people and delegates. And at that conference, they talked about UN Agenda 21 and their new ideas for a sustainable world, and it's just a continuation of the same thing. But one of the things they talk about is unlimited immigration and a world without borders. And Hillary Clinton, who has been anointed as Obama's successor, said in a speech to, I believe it's Goldman Sachs executives, that she envisions the U.S. as part of a single hemispheric common market with free trade and open borders. And then she also said that Americans who want to limit immigration are fundamentally un-American. And she has called
I guess I'm un-American after 23 years in the U.S. Army. And,
me too.
And the fact that I live in Texas, and if you have any idea what's going on the border with the cartels, and would like for that to be next door, your next door neighbor, anybody that is naive enough. Of course, it really that doesn't have anything to do with the reality why they want open borders. They want open borders because they want one world government. They want one world government so that a small group of people can control the rest of the human beings on the planet. So
everything. And that part of that one world government concept is that we've got to have total anarchy to destroy the system we're under now, so that they can be the heroes and move in with their solution to the anarchy that we're going to have in our country. And, of course, their solution is one world government under a Marxist Socialist system.
You know, when we were filming this in San Francisco or near San Francisco, we filmed Dr. Stan Monteith, who, you know, has gone on to his reward. And he said to me, you know, this is, speaking of the whole concept generically, this is all so complex that the human mind, and it's so total that the human mind could not possibly have conceived of it, and it is spiritual warfare. And I personally believe that what we're witnessing is the final battle between good and evil. And you know, it is, as Charlie Daniels said in the film, it's we've all read the book, we know how it ends and we win. But the issue is, though, that we're not to roll over and not resist tyranny. And secondly, throughout Scripture, you can see countless times when, if a nation turns back to God, which we have not, and I'm not certainly going to, then the course of history can change. So does that mean it won't happen ultimately? No, it just means it doesn't necessarily happen to be right now, and it's awfully close, it seems. No man knows the day and the hour, but it seems awfully close as it is now. And I'm sure that Mark would have a point of view about that, considering his profession.
Yes, you know, it's the same old story. The Tower of Babel was man's attempt to unify against God. And I really think it's the same agenda by the same master, and we're just seeing it repackaged.
I think you're absolutely right, Mark. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier in this discussion is that this is truly a war against Christianity. Our own government has turned against Christianity in a Christian nation. And we see that with all the rules and regulations that ban the Ten Commandments from courthouses. We ban prayer from schools. We ban all these things that are Christian icons and Christian procedures. And at the same time, they open our schools to Islamic and all these other religions and say that's just fine. And when in the world did we allow that to happen in our country? This is absolutely amazing that we've allowed this to happen, and all I can say is that we've got to stop this, and we've got to stop it now. And this election and your movie, Revelation, Dawn of Global Government, I believe is going to be one of the key tools and one of the key films that we're going to see in this country to try to thwart that attempt to create a global government. So I sure hope we can make the most of that. And with that, Chuck, I'd like to leave you some time at the end of this conversation to talk about how the listeners can get your film, how to get to your website, and how to get your film and how to bring it to theaters near them.
Well, like I said, the timing was, we were frustrated a year and a half ago that we couldn't get it out in theaters, but I'm so glad, in fact, that we didn't, because now we have a better opportunity with being able to release it not only on DVD but also in theaters, which you can't do if you do only a theatrical release. You can't do DVDs so long after the film is out of theaters in a normal release. So now you can go to our website, which is revelationthemovie.info, and on the home page there are icons at the bottom. The first two, one is tickets, one is DVD. Tickets takes you to a page which explains the whole theatrical experience on how you can get it to a theater in your town, and the DVD icon just literally takes you to Amazon where we sell DVDs, and we have the movie poster there as well, which is like 27 by 40 inches, full-size movie poster. The sort of logo, if you want to call it that, of the film is one of the four horsemen, well, the pale horse of the four horsemen, sort of skeletal figure on a horse descending, and the title, of course, above it, Relations Dawn of Global Government. But it's available in DVD, and it's also available for theatrical release. And I will tell you that on the big screen, it has surround sound track. And on the big screen, it's really impressive. It's a whole different experience from seeing it, on a DVD with your home TV, because it really rattles around your brain. We had a premiere in Houston in April when we released it that weekend theatrically, and uninvited guests. There were 300 people that came, including Ron Paul. Of course, Mark was in uniform and spoke, and General Boykin was there. So we had 300 people there, and almost every time we had a theatrical screening, there's been a standing ovation. And we've had everyone from elderly people to young couple with babies come up almost crying and saying they didn't know and what can they do. And that's what we want. It's an information war, as Alex Jones says. It's about enlightening people to what's going on, so that everybody has their gift, everybody has the ability to do something, and to resist this. And ours was making a film, and everybody can do something, or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, just do something. And if we can get a large number of people aware of these ideas, I think just in terms of a sense of self-preservation, people won't just roll over.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And one of the things that I say, Chuck, about this is that church groups and civic groups all over our country, this is a great opportunity for those folks to purchase tickets, to pre-order the number of tickets, and I believe it's 70. Is that correct?
I think, 70. If you can pre-sell 70 tickets, meaning to all your friends and family, or easier to your church or veterans group or a tea party, whatever, then the company, the distributor, steps in, books the theater, handles all of everything logistically, and just gets it done. And then what that does is get people that see it then will in turn want to usually get involved somehow and do it again, and so on and so forth. And but I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate what Anita has done through this trial, this endurance race trying to fight the good fight. We just never thought it would take 6 years, and amazingly, none of the issues are old. They're as live as they ever were, and it just proves the fact that we have to get out there and do something about it. And Mark has really put in a lot of time on it. We've traveled all over the country. We were in Pennsylvania recently, and General Boykin and Anita and I went to recently, in fact last week, to Blue Eye, Missouri, and we're on the Jim Baker show, and he has 350 million people that listen to that show, and they were really talking in detail about the film. So I think the point of that is that that's 350 million people globally, but is just trying to get the word out. I mean, to patriots, the issues in our film are not a new story, but that's the point. We want patriots to take it as Paul reveres all those people out there who still glaze over, and that's most of the people.
I think you're absolutely on point, and we reached the end of the program, but I want to thank you folks for agreeing to be guests on our program, and I thank you for your work on the behalf of the Patriot movement and people who love liberty worldwide, and especially in our country. You are doing a great service, and I ask our listeners, put a group together, buy 70 tickets, get this movie in your hometown, and do it everywhere in the country and all over the world. And I believe at the point where we get this film out to a lot of people, there will be an epiphany for people that have walked around with their head in the sand, and they will understand just exactly how close we are to the tipping point. And with that, I'm going to have a quote at the end of this program, and I hope people will listen to this. This is Edward Everett Hale. In 1903, he was the scribe for the Senate, and he was the great-grandson of Nathan Hale. And he had a quote that I think is certainly worth talking about and saying, and it is, quote, "I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. What I can do, I should do, and with the help of God, I will do." Chuck, Anita, and Mark, thank you very much for your participation in our show, and let's stay in touch and keep me posted on how your movie is doing nationwide and worldwide.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dan.